I just wanted to take a moment to welcome Rabbi David Lazar to our worship service. Once again, this is our friend David is with us, who has shared with us in worship, shared with us in Bible study, shared with us at Temple Isaiah, where he is the rabbi, and in a sense of even a joint program that we were a part of a while back called Psalm Springs, and it was a lovely time of four nights together. It is wonderful to have a colleague in ministry like David Lazar. And he is a man of the community, a person of great faith and inspiration to me, a person leading his congregation in ways that are inspiring, and a person who has been willing to come and offer to us the Word as it comes to him. And that is a great gift that we are offered. So I am thankful. Also thankful that we work together on the annual Interfaith Welcome Shabbat Interfaith Pride service each year now for the last 3 years, and looking forward again to that. So it's wonderful to have a colleague in ministry in this way and in community in this way. And so we welcome Rabbi Lazar and thank you for being with us today.
It's a great responsibility to bear the word. Let's see how seriously you can take me with these glasses. It's enough burdens, enough distractions. Beads, really? America, what can I say? I'm still learning. You know that I'm still new here. It's only been 2.5 years. And I know that while Mardi Gras seems on TV and movies to be a rather maybe a less than spiritual kind of an affair with a lot of letting loose, it's in order to provide a time to be very serious. All of our traditions have the same thing, I think, all over the world. Ours is Purim, which is coming up in the next few weeks, the festival that commemorates the saving of the Jews. Whether it happened or did not happen is not an issue. It's the story that repeated itself time and again throughout Jewish history, in which they wanted to kill us. We succeeded in defeating him. Now let's eat. That's basically that's the Jewish thing in a nutshell. And there's masks and dressing up and merrymaking as well on Purim, and drinking. So much so the Talmud instructs us to drink on Purim until you don't know the difference between blessed is Mordechai and cursed is Haman. You can rest assured many rabbis had a lot to say about that one, trying to get around it. My favorite solution to that is drink a little bit more than usual, and you'll be tired. You put your head down, and while you're sleeping, you won't know the difference between Mordechai and Haman. Bearing the word, as I say, is a great responsibility. Bearing the title of rabbi, the only progressive rabbi in Palm Springs who is really engaged with society around in a deep and a meaningful way, is made much easier by having colleagues like Rev Kev and Father Andrew Green and so many others. And our coffees in which we discuss books we've read, challenges we've had, and yes, as my lay people are part of my challenge, you are a challenge for Reverend Kev.
Wait.
And I'm sure you'll let him know that later on at the meeting. But being together in communion enables us to grow in our own personas and to better help the communities that we serve. The two readings that we had this morning, Elijah and Mark. Elijah, the story cut short a bit. You probably know that right after this, chariot comes down and swoops him up to heaven. Elijah doesn't die. Elijah's not the first not to die, by the way. Enoch, not terribly famous, not a lot written about him in the Hebrew Bible. It's known as Hanoch. But in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's tons of things about Enoch. I've got a book this big just with texts and commentaries about the different versions of Enoch's life and afterlife. In fact, before we had Elijah doing the things that he does, which I'm going to explain in a second, Enoch was doing it. In other words, there was somebody who was down here who went up there, or there, without being vertical, right? Went there and came back or comes back from time to time. And that was made possible because the story of the end of his days let it be so. He was not buried. He did not die. There's no tombstone. So he could move around. It's the same thing with Elijah. And Elijah's history, not only in Talmudic, the early Jewish traditions, but today as well, is very rich. In fact, so rich that he absolutely competes with Moses. And judging from the scripture in Mark today, the gospel according to Mark, that was something that was going on already 2,000 years ago. So a little bit about Elijah. He wasn't a fun guy. Absolutely not a fun guy. According to one of the traditions, he had no parents and he had no children, which of course saw him as being an angel of sorts. Somebody just spending a little bit of time down here to set us straight. His main goal was to get the people of Israel, that's the northern kingdom, not Judea, but the northern kingdom, to repent so that rain would come. The first story, and if you want to read these stories, they're great stories. They're concentrated at the end of the first book of Kings, the beginning of the second book of Kings. And he first comes on the scene in a place called Nahal Krit, in a wadi, in a riverbed that dries up. And there's no rain. And he's there by himself praying for the people. And of all things, the ravens come to give him food. He's given food a few times in his life by others. And there's the famous story of Elijah on one hand and the hundreds of prophets of the Baal, that is the competing Canaanite religion of the time, on Mount Carmel to see who could bring rain. As the ordeal works out, it is indeed Elijah who wins that battle. And then he fears for his life and he travels down south, one night being very hungry and given food again by an angel this time. Ends up on Mount Horeb, which is just another name for Mount Sinai. There's another famous episode where he goes to the north. He's not loved, he's always running away because he's the kind of prophet that nobody likes, especially the king and the queen. And he finds himself in a place called Tzorfat, which is up near today with Tyre, Tzor, that area. Tyre and Sidon, what is the Lebanese coast today, but still part of the historical land of Israel, where he is taken in by a woman, a well-to-do woman, prays for her, she has a son, and boom, that son dies, but Elijah brings him back to life. And the Elijah stories live on after he was taken up to heaven, because as we saw in the passage today, he made a deal with his student. I think you called him Elisha. We in Hebrew say Elisha or Elisha. Made a deal with him that his miracles would be, his strength would be even greater than his was. And when you read those stories together, which are strewn over about 10, 12 chapters, you can almost count them. And the rabbis in the Talmud did count them. And they came up with the fact that Elisha had twice as many miracles that he performed than Elijah. What is this about? It's about people living in this world that are showing us day to day, 24/7, that there's a presence of God. Don't get used to nature the way it is, says these stories. Don't give up hope. Don't misbehave. God is present in your life, but you don't see it. Otherwise, why would we need these guys to parade around? And they're different than Abraham and Joseph. And they're different in many ways from Moses and Aaron. Certainly from King David. They're different kinds of figures. And the fact that this Elijah so easily transversed the world, this world to the other world, says a lot. Let's go to the passage in Mark now. Thank you again for inviting me to speak. If for no other reason, I delve into another part of Christian literature of the New Testament that I don't know about. This is probably my first endeavor into Mark. Us Jews, we usually like Matthew. Matthew's our book. Right? Matthew's, yeah. A lot of Jewish stuff on Matthew. Not so much on Mark. So I got a chance to explore a little bit. I also got a chance to read the gospel according to Mark in a way which I'd like to, perhaps I'm kidding myself, but I'd like to feel is close to the ones that heard him say, or the ones that read what he wrote. Because these were Jews living with a good knowledge of biblical literature and extra biblical literature. Things like Enoch, which doesn't get developed in the Bible itself, but it's out there. So many traditions. And so here he goes, 6 days later. And of course, you've got to ask why 6 days. And there are lots of different commentaries that you find in the Christian tradition. But the one that makes the sense most to me, and the one I'm going to say, it's the right one, of course, like that. 6 days brings us back to the Moses story. They're going up a mountain. It's not just him. He's going with three other guys. Two or three? Two other guys, okay. Moses goes back up into the mountain. There's a long section in Exodus, and it's very unclear. If you're like me, coming from a background of academic research in the Bible, what happened is there's many sources that have been blended together, and the editing is not fantastic. So you get a little confused. But from Exodus 19 to the end of the book, it's hard to keep track of where Moses is exactly on the mountain. But in chapter 24, you can see a number of it, and it's 6 days later. So the 6 days are there. That's 6. Many people have said 6 is a natural number, 7 is a supernatural number, hence the day of the week, there's 6 days of creation, and on the 7th God rested. It's kind of supernatural. But I think here it wants us to go back in our minds, for those of us, those of them, that were really well versed in biblical literature. Oh, I know that. 6 days, that's Moses. Mountain, that's Moses. Going up with a few guys, that's Moses. Nadav and Avihu, Aaron's sons, were going up with him. On a certain point. They're going up to the mountain Horeb. And you know who else was on that mountain? Sinai, Horeb, it's the same. They're just called different names, different places. Who else was up on that mountain? Elijah. So God shows God's self up there in a special way. We'll get to that. But Elijah was also on that mountain by himself when he was running for his life from Isabel and Ahab, her husband, the not so nice kings, and king and queen. When he's running for his life after the business with the prophets of the Baal, that's where he goes. And there's the famous scene, which I'm almost sure I spoke about once here. I seem to remember saying where he hears Kol Dmama Daka, a still thin voice, which I think better is that he hears God speaking in silence. That's what he hears. He hears silence. He expected to see God in the earthquake, expected to see God in the wind, expected to see God in the fire and the lightning. No. He experiences God, Elijah, in silence. All this is happening to Mark's public who's listening or reading him. All these things are converging on them. So I've got Jesus up there. It's a familiar scene. It's a mountain. It doesn't say what mountain, but it purposely doesn't say. It doesn't say a particular mountain. The text knows to say a particular mountain if there was a historical tradition about the mountain. No, the name of the mountain is not important. The fact that it was a mountain. We go up to mountains. That's our weakness. Because we think God is up there. We go up there. So those are the stories. But I don't think anybody really wants us to believe that that's where God is, as opposed to down here. But we need it. We need it because we sense that looking up in the stars, there's something infinite out there which is totally beyond us. We don't see that when we're looking here. We can touch things. So we need that. We may know that God exists. We may accept the stories and the traditions that God is the creator. God is the source of light. Life, perhaps also the source of light, but I would add also the source of darkness. We may know that, but we don't feel it. So there needed to be a story, whether it happened or not, where Jesus goes up to the place where those things happened for the leaders of Israel, and he hangs out with two of the greatest leaders. Just happens up there, and there they are, Moses and Elijah. They're hanging. Now Elijah could be there because he didn't really die. He can go up and down whenever he wants. Right? Moses, different story. On the other hand, what does the end of the book of Deuteronomy tell us? The God said to Moses, go up on the mountain, take a look at the land, the promised land, that you ain't going there. Take a look. Now's your time to die. Moses dies. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. Moses dies, and God's self buries him. Like, what's that about? How did that work exactly, right? It's not that Moses' death was questioned. It's not that Elijah's death was questioned. In other words, they're no longer functioning in the world, but they were something special. Something needed to live on in both cases. That's the message, of course, with Jesus. Something needed to live on. So it makes sense. So I've got this Jewish public listening to this. They know what's going on because it's being spoken of in terms that they know, in literary context that they're familiar with. And that's the picture. And everybody's thinking right now, what does the mountain look like? Is it one of these mountains? Is it a green one someplace? Well, it doesn't matter. You're up on the mountain, there are three of them, and then you got the apostles are there. The students are there. Rabbi, what's going on here? So it's Peter, right, who says, maybe I should we should put together 3 tents, 3 booths, 3 shelters. I have to confess, when we first spoke about this, I had all intentions of going to the Greek text because I was blessed to study Greek, Koine Greek, when I was in college many years ago. I can still use it, and I didn't do it. Didn't get to the Greek text, but I was really dying to see what exactly is the word that's used there. And then to check in the Septuagint, that is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, to see what words are used. And I'll tell you why. There's a lot of possibilities what it could be. Why build a shelter? Well, if he really understood that it was the people he was looking at, maybe he didn't understand yet who Jesus was. But if it's Elijah and Moses, they knew who Elijah and Moses, why do they need shelters? They didn't need spaceships. They didn't need, a meal. They don't need that kind of stuff. But he had a need to provide them with a shelter. So that's one way. Then that way it wouldn't matter what word was used, because whatever the word that was used in Greek means shelter of some sort. Maybe it's connected to the holiday of Sukkot, of Tabernacles. I'm not sure I understand how, other than perhaps that was a new understanding of the holiday, the same way that Passover became understood newly in its way, in Pascha, Easter, and the same way that Shavuot, Pentecost, became a new understanding in its own Christological way. Perhaps Tabernacles was on its way to doing that as well. I haven't had enough time to research. That's something that interests me. Doesn't seem so clear from this particular passage. And then there's finally another possibility, and this is from my own familiarity with rabbinic nomenclature, rabbinic language, is that an ohel, and some people translate here tent, which would be ohel. Ohel is another, not only a tent where you pitch a tent to live in, but it's another name for something you build over a graveside. A graveside is an ohel. It's a marker of a grave. Fast forward to Rambam, Maimonides, 11th, 12th century, Spain and then Egypt. I was recently looking at the laws of burial, and Maimonides says, we erect an ohel, which he meant of some sort of a monument, for people after their deaths over where they are buried. But you don't have to do it for a righteous person. You don't have to do it for a teacher, because that person's words and that person's deeds are their monument. And this is what I would like to say, that perhaps you don't find in the traditional commentaries. Is that maybe what Peter is asking is, shouldn't these people and you have a monument? Shouldn't there be a monument, a stone monument to you on this mountain, so that people remember and will learn what you had to say, will learn about your presence, all three of you, your presence, your godly presence in this world? And the answer coming from above is, no, stupid. Listen to what he has to say. Don't worry about the after death. Don't worry about the monument. Listen to what he has to say. My message for you, my message for us as we begin preparing the slow preparation towards the holiday of Passover, of Pesach, of liberation, of ourselves from the slavery that we own have in our lives, but more so for the slavery of others, how we become those vessels of God, is that you in your yearly meeting today and your cheshbon nefesh, you're taking stock and you're walking into Lent as you prepare to once again accept Christ and the resurrection, that we listen to the words. We worry a little bit less about the signs, the dedications, the titles, and we listen to the words. May it be God's will that as we talk about the Word of God, we realize that the words of God are spoken by all those who were created in God's image. Thank you.
Amen.